Mark 9. We're going to read verses 30 to 37. They left that place and passed through Galilee. Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were because he was teaching his disciples, and he said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise." But they didn't understand what he meant and were afraid to ask him about it. They came to Capernaum. When he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the road?" But they kept quiet because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, "Anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and the servant of all." He took a little child whom he placed among them. Taking the child in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me."
Thanks, Catherine. Have you ever really wanted somebody to know something? Like perhaps it's a big life lesson and you're like, I just need you to get this. Or maybe it's on the phone with your mom and you're like, I just need you to understand how the Wi-Fi works. I just really need you to understand because when I'm not there to help you, I need you to be able to figure this out. This is how it goes with my children when it comes to their classes going skating, okay? Bear with me. My kids are not really skaters, so to speak, and so they spend a lot of time on the ice instead of standing on the skates. So we've had numerous conversations about the benefits of snow pants, okay? There's multiple benefits to snow pants, and if you're not a skater, perhaps you will appreciate this. So if you wear said snow pants, when you fall on your butt, which kind of hurts, it actually hurts a little bit less, and your butt doesn't get wet. It's a bonus. My kids and I have had this conversation a few times. They agree I should wear snow pants when my class goes skating. But the problem is that often their class is not going skating until the middle of the day. And I'm like, it's not really fun to wear snow pants to school, and the rec center is not far from their school, so they walk uphill to the rec center. Don't worry, it's only uphill one way, not both. And so I will teach them how to put snow pants on. I will say, okay, so you're gonna wanna put these on. They've got these weird ankle things. You're gonna wanna put the snow pants on. They're in this bag. I go through the whole process with them. They get their snow pants on. I'm like, okay, now let's practice taking off said snow pants. So they take off the snow pants and I say, okay, can you fit them back in the bag that I put them in? Yep, good, good. Okay, we're gonna wear snow pants. We're gonna wear snow pants. Okay, put the snow pants on and then your butt's not wet for the rest of the day. Okay, we're gonna do it. Guess what? Every single time I have had my two older children have done skating with their classes on field trips multiple times a year. Guess who comes home with a wet butt? My kids. My kids come home with a wet butt. And I will say, what happened to the snow pants? And you know what they'll tell me? They're like, my friends weren't wearing snow pants. I'm like, your friends know how to skate, they play hockey. They're like, well, it was just too much work. I didn't want to take them out of the bag. I'm like, okay. So you should say to me, Amy, why do you keep packing snow pants if they refuse to wear them? No. We have this conversation every time, and every time they say, no, this time I want to wear the snow pants. I didn't like that my butt was wet. And I'm like, okay, this time we'll wear the snow pants. Do you want me to go over it with you? Yes, I need to remember how to put on the snow pants. And then every time they come home, and guess what? They're not wearing the snow pants, ever, ever, ever. You think I would learn, but I have not. Friends, this is a lesson in futility, is what this is right here. And you know what is wonderful is that I also think Jesus understands the exasperation and futility of trying to get somebody to understand something that you think you have explained so clearly, yet it doesn't seem to take. Because what we're about to encounter today is almost the exact same scenario that Jordan spoke about last week in Mark chapter 8. We are continuing on in our series on the book of Mark, and today we find ourselves in chapter 9, and Jesus is on his last tour, and he's heading through Galilee before what will eventually be heading to the cross, and he wants to spend some time with his disciples, specifically just with them. He wants to take some time with his guys. It's fun to be with the whole group, but he just wants to be with his people. You know what I mean? When you've got that group that you're like, I love being with the crowd, but I really love being with my people. He's like, guys, I need to make sure you know how to put your snow pants on because I'm not always going to be around to help you put on your snow pants. And like they have not yet figured out this whole Messiah thing that Jesus has talked about. It's been 3 years of watching Jesus as he upsets religious leaders. He's scandalized the systems of how things are done, the social norms, and what has been the point of it all? These disciples are the ones who are going to carry on this message after Jesus is no longer with them, and he wants to make sure they understand because time is running out. And so they left the place and passed through Galilee. He did not want anybody else to know where they were because he wanted to teach his disciples, and he said to them, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And after 3 days, he will rise. But they did not understand what he meant, and they were afraid to ask him about it. Now, this isn't the first time that the disciples have heard Jesus talk like this. He's actually said this before. As I said, Jordan talked about it last week, and they've already heard this idea, and then they rejected it. Jesus speaks in chapter 8 of his death, and in particular, Peter says, no, Jesus, you're supposed to be the king. You're not going to die. That's not the way to greatness. Dying isn't the way to greatness. And Jesus says, get out of my way. You don't understand. And Peter and Jesus have this whole infamous exchange where Jesus basically calls him Satan. It's pretty famous. You can look it up. And this time, when Jesus makes a similar statement, his disciples don't say anything. Maybe they're afraid of saying the wrong thing like Peter. Maybe they just don't want to talk about it because the implications of what Jesus is saying are simply unfathomable. Without Jesus, their leader, this guy who's done everything so different than anything they've ever experienced before, who were they? Who were they going to be without Jesus? This whole thing, this whole life that they had might collapse. This truth did not align with the disciples' expectations, but they were too afraid to ask why. They couldn't hear the second part, this piece about the resurrection, only the first part, the worst part. Because a resurrection, that wasn't even in their vocabulary. A resurrection wasn't a thing that they knew of. And the idea of their king coming and conquering through death, what? They could only picture Jesus as an earthly king. They didn't understand what Jesus' death on a cross would mean yet. The idea of death bringing glory, I don't understand. So they keep walking. They don't engage Jesus with this crazy statement he has just made. And it's here that we encounter what I'll call the natural kingdom. The disciples are walking along, and as they came to Capernaum, when he was in the house, he asked them, what were you arguing about on the road? But they kept quiet because on the way they had argued about who was going to be the greatest. Really, guys? Again, we just went over this. in our last conversation. And then what's wild, and something we're actually not going to cover as we continue on in our series on Mark, is chapter 10. We're going to skip over that into chapter 11 next week. But in chapter 10, this familiar scenario will play out once again. Jesus will predict his own death, and there goes the disciples, turning to each other to talk about the hierarchy of the greatest, the greater, the best, better. Who is the fairest of them all? So why does Mark, in his biography of Jesus, why does he keep talking about this? And let's be clear, he's not pointing this out to humiliate the disciples. And it's not because the disciples are unusually selfish. It's because the disciples are incredibly normal. And Jesus understands this reality, and he's trying to make sure the disciples get it about what's going to happen to him and then what comes after that. Okay, I know that your friends don't put on snow pants, but you're going to want to put the snow pants on because your butt is going to get wet. Jesus says, I am the way. And if you want to follow me, these were Jordan's verses last week, you've got to follow me to the cross. If you want to be great, which is what the disciples are trying to establish, you must take up your cross. So much like all of us, the disciples do what we do best. We turn our attention to things we understand, the things that we can control. And this is straight up human psychology. We only know what we know, so we create narratives and scenarios based off of what we already understand, what we can already perceive. None of them had experienced this reality that Jesus was talking about. And none of them could picture the idea of their friend Jesus dying on a cross and coming back to life. So you know what? Let's not think about that. Let's not worry about that. Let's talk about this whole idea of being a king. Okay, so we're friends with Jesus, which gives us a bit of clout. And I bet we could get into the VIP tent. Let's talk about that. That's way more interesting. And that's naturally, of course, where their minds go. Because what would the pecking order be? This is something they can talk about. It's something we can think about. They're hashing out their merits. They're like Peter, James, John. They're obviously Jesus' faves, so they'll probably be first in the pecking order. So when Jesus says, what are you guys talking about? Of course, Jesus already knows what they're talking about. But it's one of those self-reflective question moments. And all the disciples go quiet. Because maybe they suddenly are very aware of the dichotomy of what's been going on here. Jesus is talking about unspeakable, unimaginable horror and sacrifice. And they're planning the seating chart for who gets to sit where at dinner parties. But this isn't a surprise to Jesus. This isn't something that Jesus is like, oh my gosh, you guys, I'm so shocked and I'm just so embarrassed that this is the kind of guys I've been hanging out with. Jesus already understands the human condition. Maybe that's why he brings this up 3 times in a row. He's really trying to work this through. And guess what? Maybe this is actually the point. What Jesus has actually just uncovered in the disciples' silence. It is the humbling reality of humanity. Did you catch it? It's right there. But they kept quiet. In Mark's description of the silence of the disciples, it is the exact same word for word description that he uses of the silence of the Pharisees. That's the religious leaders at the healing of the man with a deformed hand in chapter 3. These are the leaders that Jesus ends up basically, they don't have anything to say because they can't call Jesus on anything. He's just kind of schooled them in their own religious biases and judgment. And they go silent. This silence is the same silence that the disciples are currently experiencing. they've both been called out by Jesus without Jesus really having to say much of anything. And I'm sure for the disciples, this is actually pretty humbling. If we know anything about the gospel stories, it talks a lot about how Jesus really corrects the Pharisees in ways that their smugness and pompous religious piety ends up blowing up in their faces. And so I could imagine if the disciples have walked with Jesus and perhaps they feel pretty good about themselves when they're with Jesus and they're talking about the Pharisees or they're witnessing something the Pharisees are doing, and suddenly they're like, oh, right. This is embarrassing. It's one of these moments that they have been with Jesus all this time, but they've completely missed the point. Suddenly, perhaps they are facing their own reality of religious blindness. And we can't totally fault the disciples, because if we understand anything about both them and the Pharisees, this is the culture they've all been raised in. That the Jewish culture was all about pomp and ceremony and who would sit where and the pecking order of every dinner and every gathering and everything. Who was who? This is really common. So of course, this is the systems they are naturally going to swerve towards. Every single thing that their culture had aligned themselves with was all about status. Who are you associated with? Who would you never associate with? Friends, Jesus is not anti-establishment. He's not railing on the Pharisees for the sake that they're part of this establishment. He's not pro-weird hodgepodge group of men. That's a whole thing. It's a club, a whole weird hodgepodge group of followers. Nor is he pro-religious and anti-radical thinking different. Jesus isn't saying my group of disciples is better because they're a whole bunch of random guys, and these guys are the religious elite, and they're, the established, the man. Jesus isn't saying this one's better and this one's better. He's like, look at the commonality of the human heart. It doesn't matter if you are from this generational thing or you are part of this little group that started and it seems unlikely and it doesn't really have a title, and what is this thing? What Jesus is pointing out here is the humbling reality of humanity. Jesus is pointing out here something that he is making a stake and a claim that is what I would call counternatural. It is different than where our hearts would naturally turn. Because Jesus understands something not just about the Pharisees, not just about his disciples. What Jesus understands is something about every human heart. Left to our own devices, left to our own processes of working it out, we instinctively build little kingdoms where we are first. We look for achievement, or we look for significance in our achievement. We find security and control as long as we understand and we can work all the pieces. We find our identity in our status. We feel really good about ourselves and our importance when we're recognized for the things and our accomplishments. It looks different. There's things that are really important for one of us that the other person's like, I don't care anything about that. Maybe it's some of these pieces of recognition through your career, or it's control in your family. Your family is exactly the picture-perfect way that you want them to be, or it's your reputation, or it's your money. There's a million things, but underneath all of them is the same hope that if this is done right, then I'll finally be enough. And this doesn't happen because we're super selfish or we're foolish. Often there's really good reasons behind wanting to achieve these things. We often want the good things that are attached to these things. But we have put all of our stock into when we have achieved, then we will be. But what's ironic about it is that if we look at the disciples specifically in this moment, as they are having this conversation with Jesus, the disciples have walked in stride with Jesus. They have seen miracles. They have casted out demons. They were literally walking arm in arm. I don't know if they did the whole like Wizard of Oz situation, but they were walking step in step with God himself, and yet they are still arguing about their status. And this tells us something. This tells us something about the human condition, that this isn't simply about ambition and working hard and I want to do well. It comes back to identity. The question underneath all of these questions, whether it's in the ancient Near East or it's here today, is the question that is underneath all the questions that propels us is, am I enough? Do I matter? Will my life count? I need to make something of myself. So we climb ladders, hoping that they'll have the answers to those questions we're asking. Hopefully they'll fulfill all the insecurities and aches that we're holding in the shadows of our heart. And here's the part that convicts me. Whenever Jesus asks me to trust him, my first instinct isn't, yes, Lord, I'm joyfully picking up my cross because I know you are good and the path to life. If you listen in the morning, that's what my prayer time sounds like, just like that. Just kidding, that doesn't usually sound like that. It's usually like me trying to keep my eyes open with toothpicks. But you know what's the question I actually usually ask when the Lord invites me into something? What will this cost me? What am I going to have to give up? What will people think if I do that? Will it really be worth it? I put all this pressure on Jesus to prove that his way is actually better, because I am so caught up in the ways that I know for success. And what's really embarrassing about all of it is that I can already tell you it is not very often that I ask all these other routes to success that I have in my mind. What am I going to have to give up for that? How do I know that this is going to make me happy? I never question if success is going to make me happy. I never question if money is going to make me happy. But I often ask Jesus, is your way going to make me happy? Is that really going to make me happy? And maybe it's just me. Maybe you guys are much more secure in all things than I am. But often the things that I am chasing are not even that grandeur. They're, I think, rather common. And often they're things that sound like this. Once I make a little bit more money, I'm going to be happy. I've never asked for receipts on that. Like, is that actually going to make me happy? Prove it before I pursue that. Once I'm married, once we have kids, once I'm pastoring, once we buy a house, once I'm making a bit more money, once we buy a little bit bigger of a house, because now we have, 2 kids, once we're done having kids, once we buy a little bit bigger of a house, once I become a lead pastor, once we take a yearly vacation, once when we renovate our church building and we don't have to worry about those things anymore, once the kids are grown up, then I'll feel settled. I never stop and question if those things are really on the path to actually bringing me this deep fulfillment that I'm longing for, but I often will question Jesus. If I do that, what's going to happen? If I change that in my life, how do I know that's going to make me happy? That sounds pretty inconvenient. I demand proof from Jesus that I've never demanded from money or success or from reputation. And yet, every time I arrive at one of these achievements, I'm still thirsty. And if I'm not satisfied with those achievements, I don't blame them, I blame myself for not working hard enough. That even just making a little bit more money, I just need to make a little bit more money. Actually, it's not, I got it wrong, it's probably this much more money. I haven't realized yet that these ways to success, these ways to identity are still seeming to be shifting goalposts that keep moving. And do you see what is happening here? It's a thirst to get ahead, to achieve the things that make us feel in control. And what's wild about it is that 13-year-old Amy, I've got all the things she ever wanted. I've even got the golden retriever. Which sometimes I'm like, 13-year-old Amy, you did not know what you wished for. This dog is a hurricane with ears. But that's another point. But the point is, why do I find myself still striving? Look at these disciples. They are literally here with Jesus, and they find themselves striving. And Jesus says, because you are focusing on the wrong thing. Like the disciples, I'm tempted to believe that my own little kingdom will finally satisfy me. We keep chasing significance in places that cannot bear the weight of our souls. And the problem with chasing these achievements is this. People may spend their whole lives climbing the ladder of success only to find once they reach the top, the ladder is leaning against the wrong wall. This was originally said by Thomas Merton, but made fairly famous by Stephen Covey. And that's exactly where Jesus meets us. Because Jesus is about to offer them and us a different definition of greatness. Jesus says, I have a different kingdom. And here is the thing I don't want you to miss. Jesus is not asking the disciples to lose something valuable or get rid of these things. He's asking them and inviting them to stop chasing something that could never give them what they're looking for. Things that will never be able to actually fill them and transform them more into the image of Christ. So Jesus is like, okay, let's try this a different way. And it's in this that we see the alternative kingdom that Jesus is about to show the disciples. So we're moving into part 2. This is the alternative kingdom. The disciples might be feeling a little bit called out. There's just like that awkward silence in the room. Have you ever been there? You're like waiting for somebody to say something. Should you say something? I think I heard the door. You're going to go check the door, see if there's anybody there. How are we living in light of what Jesus is talking about? How are we going to live differently if we've realized all these things are not actually fulfilling to us? Jesus says, what are you talking about over there? And the disciples go silent because they suddenly realize, I don't think we're talking about the right things. Jesus sits down and he calls the 12 over. And this, in that culture, would have been like, okay, this is an authoritative teaching moment. Come here. He sits them down and calls them over, and it's basically like, I am making a point. It is in bold. And of course, because it's Jesus, he uses an object lesson. Classic Jesus. He puts a child in his lap, and he says to them, taking the child in his arms, he says to them, whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me. This is the image that Jesus is painting, is like, you're over here talking about this, but I'm going to tell you what's actually going to bring you greatness. And now we think to ourselves, great, children are great. Children are precious. A little bit sticky, but precious. Friends, we're reading this through 21st century Western people eyes. In the ancient world, children were not admired because of their innocence or celebrated because they were cute. They were considered the lowest in society. They had no status, no influence, no power, no ability to advance your reputation. They couldn't do anything for you. And that's exactly why Jesus chooses a child in this moment. Right in the middle of the disciples' argument about who belongs at the top, Jesus places someone at the very bottom and says, to serve someone like this is what will make you great. This is what is going to bring you the fulfillment that you are trying to fulfill with your seating chart. Welcome the person who cannot increase your status. Love the person who cannot repay you. Make room for the one the world overlooks, because that is what my Father is like. The disciples are saying, how do I become great? And Jesus says, here is someone who can offer you absolutely nothing. Love them well. Friends, that is the alternative kingdom, and it is profoundly countercultural. We like the idea of charity. We like the idea of like, oh yeah, I had this extra little something. I'm not using it, so you can have it. It's convenient. But God is calling us to something deeper because we always want to ask, what is in it for me? And Jesus says, who can you love who has nothing to offer you? That is where the kingdom becomes visible. A beautiful paraphrase of a verse found in the Gospel of Matthew says, "It is in the small and the powerless that God appears to the world. Our response to the hungry and the thirsty and the lonely and the naked and the sick and the imprisoned is our response to God." The theologian James Edwards says, "At no point does the way of Jesus diverge more sharply from the way of the world than on the question of greatness." Jesus does not repudiate prominence and greatness, but he redefines them. So don't hear what I'm not saying. Because you hold a title, because you have a position, because you make a lot of money, God is not saying, I'm looking down on you for those things. He's saying, how are you using that to serve those who can't serve you? He's redefining what greatness looks like. This was a quote I found somewhere, and I couldn't find the original sayer of said quote, but it wasn't me. Bear with me because it's long. Jesus' dramatization is a call to a wonderful, liberating, spiritual egalitarianism. We are to receive all of God's people as we do children, with no thought to their accomplishments, their influence, their fame, or their gifts. I've never asked my children to show me their credentials before inviting them to the dinner table. Maybe like clean hands. I'm like, please have you washed your hands? You cannot sit down until you wash your hands. This rules out seeking the powerful or influential for what they can do for us. This is a warning about neglecting the simple, the humble, and the ordinary. This is counter-natural Jesus. We constantly are looking to get ahead, and Jesus says, I actually want you to look at who's behind you. The world's way is upward mobility. The way of Jesus is downward mobility. Friends, this is how we are to love people well, is how we achieve greatness in the kingdom of God. And this is the way of Jesus. And we actually probably, for those of you, especially if you've been in church for a while, you're like, yeah, that sounds great. I do. I really do love that idea. But actually, I think it's really hard for us to truly live this way because we all want a life that matters, but more often than not, we are looking for significance in the wrong kingdom. And the ache is not sacrifice. Don't hear what I'm not saying. The ache is not that, oh, I need to do more. I need to serve more. I need to be better at, saying hi to my neighbor. The ache is actually trust. Where are we trusting that our fulfillment is actually going to come from? Because Jesus is right there with the disciples, and he is telling them what is going to happen and that they need to trust this. And the disciples are like, you're going to be the king? Where do we get to sit? And they are hearing what makes sense to them. And Jesus is saying, trust me. Trust me in this. And this is where we discover where we truly believe life is found. The disciples are all of us. They are asking the questions that every human heart is asking. Where do I find security or importance or affirmation or identity? And we will often say, working harder, achievement, status, position. And Jesus' answer is participation in my kingdom. That you welcome the child. In other verses, he talks about welcoming the servant. He keeps talking about how he's going to give his life away. And the disciples keep talking about what are they going to get in return. This happens 3 times. Jesus is talking about making the ultimate sacrifice, and yet the disciples turn inward and talk about how that's going to increase their status. Why do we keep believing that our own kingdom will satisfy us when Jesus keeps offering us something better? And what's beautiful about this, maybe you're new in church and maybe this is the first time you've ever heard anything like this, but we can take security in the fact that what Jesus is offering us and is demonstrating to us and is instructing us to go do isn't something he has not already done himself. We see Jesus again and again as counternatural. The night he was betrayed, the disciples are arguing about who will be the best and the greatest. And here's Jesus. He's taking off the sandals of his followers. Friends, followers that he knows in a matter of hours are going to betray and abandon him. And he washes their feet. In this culture, that was reserved for the lowest of low servants. But he wants them. He's going to demonstrate until the very end this idea of service. I'm going to invite the keys up. Jesus takes the lowest form over and over. Why? Because he is demonstrating where the kingdom of God is found. Jesus, innocent and blameless, goes to the cross. Friends, the cross is something we see on buildings and on jewelry and on all sorts of things, but it was reserved for the lowest, the worst criminals. They wouldn't even draw pictures of crosses because it was such a heinous death to die. And Jesus willingly goes to the cross so that we could be reunited with God in all of our iniquity, in all of our weakness and our arrogance and our pride and all of those things. The God that we worship, the God that we sing about, often people will think of Jesus as this angry, judgmental, horrific, power-hungry individual. But this is the God that we serve, is the one who went first. The one who laid down his life, who demonstrated over and over, who upset social norms, so that the disciples would understand and so they could live the same way, that they could teach this to the disciples that would come after. This is what Jesus did. He spent his life in service, saying, this is where the kingdom of God is found. Regardless of our position, regardless of our status, regardless of our profession, every Christian is called to lead with the heart of a servant. Biblical servanthood doesn't mean giving up authority. Biblical servanthood means using whatever authority you have for the good of others. True greatness in God's kingdom is not measured by influence or success, but by humble, obedient service, both in public and maybe even more importantly, in private. The disciples spend these 3 chapters, 8, 9, and 10, trying to figure out who would be first, and Jesus spent 3 chapters trying to explain why he would willingly become last. The tragedy isn't that we are selfish, it's that often we can't imagine that the way of Jesus is actually better. The ways of Jesus, where we take a back seat, where our name doesn't have to be the greatest one. Every day, we're tempted to build our little kingdoms of success. Every day, we're tempted to build a kingdom built on reputation or on comfort. A kingdom where we're admired, we're needed, we're recognized, we're important. And Jesus says there is an alternative kingdom. There is a kingdom that you're going to have to fight with everything you have, because it's going to be counterintuitive to everything that society would tell you. One where greatness is not measured by how many workers you have or how many people serve you, but by how many you love. He asked us to let go of something small that we have created to make really big. And he's asked us to embrace something we consider to be small or meaningless or unimportant, and spend our lives, give our lives to that cause. I'd ask you to stand as we wrap up. And I want you to consider this in your own life for a moment. We know names like Mother Teresa. We know about the servant acts of how she lived her life, and there's so many others that I'm sure you can think of off the top of your head. But think for a moment about the millions, if not billions, of individuals that are living humble lives in service in ways that we will never know about. It's the teacher that comes half an hour early and opens up her classroom because there's a little girl in her class whose hair is always a mess because her mom works 2 jobs. And the kids tease her, so she comes early every day and does her hair. It's the CEO who gets a Christmas bonus that is quietly redistributed to all his workers' bonuses. It's the man who commutes into the city every day and offers his neighbor a ride, never accepting gas money because he knows they have a baby on the way and transit's expensive. It's the stay-at-home mom who has a shut-in neighbor that goes over with her kids every day, brings them a snack, make sure their dishes are done. It's serving those who could never repay you. In whatever capacity that looks like, that is the kingdom of God. And so often we get concerned about the wrong things, and Jesus is like, that is not what I'm saying. But you need to know it, because how you live and how you love and how you serve is so counternatural to everything else that's going on in the world that it says something. It communicates something huge in the quietest, most humble of ways. And that is why we want to live this way, because to live in a way that is so different is remarkable. It is our testimony. We don't need to do big things for a great God. We need to do great things for a big God. And those great things are often the smallest of things. So today, I want to pray, and I want to take a moment for us to just reflect on, perhaps it's a space of repentance, that we're saying, God, I'm sorry for the things that I have made into the most fulfilling things. Friends, to desire belonging and family and security and all of those things, they are not wrong. They are not bad. But if that's where we think that our fulfillment and that Christ-like transformation is going to happen, they will never be able to support that weight. Maybe for you, it's a moment of, God, where are the least and the last in my life that I can serve? Give me eyes to see. I'm going to invite the prayer team forward as we're praying. But let's just take a minute and pray together. Father God, I thank you. I thank you for your son, Jesus, that he has demonstrated this so beautifully. He has demonstrated this to us in a way that we could never repay. And may it be out of our appreciation, out of our thankfulness, out of our gratitude. May it be from that place that we are wanting to serve others, that we follow a God who has laid down his life for us. And so may we lay down our lives for others. May we find trust in that. May there be security in that you will never disappoint. So Lord, just draw circles around the things that we have made greater, that we have put our hope for fulfillment in. Lord, help us to put those in their right place so that we can love those pieces properly, that we do not expect weight of them that they were never meant to carry. And God, give us a greater trust for who you are and the ways in which you are calling us to live. May the things that perhaps you are asking us to turn over to you, may there be a trust in knowing that you are good and you have our best in mind. So we love you, Lord. Give us hearts that burn to be more like your son, Jesus. We love you, Lord. Amen. All Our prayer team's going to be up here. Perhaps it's something to do with this conversation, or perhaps it's something you walked in here with today. They would love to take a minute and pray with you. But let's spend a minute and reflect on the kingdoms we've built and the kingdom that God is continuously inviting us into.